The existence of evil and suffering is used to argue that an all-powerful, all-loving creator doesn't exist. If such a being existed, they would surely remove evil from this world. There are many theodicies to defend this idea of a creator, possible reasons why a god would allow such things to exist for good reasons. Typically, these defenses tend to focus more on virtue ethics, stating that free will is necessary if it leads to increased suffering, etc. However, it is commonly believed that if a maximally good god were to exist, that utilitarian ethics could not be true. It could not be the case that if what was good was the universal maximization of pleasure throughout the cosmos, that God would allow any being to suffer seemingly needlessly. However, I'm going to present two arguments that not only demonstrate why evil and suffering is a logical outcome of a utilitarian God, but that also seem more simple and straightforward than many typical theodicies based on virtue ethics. I've already done a video giving a utilitarian defense of an omnibenevolent God on my channel despite not being a utilitarian myself, but these arguments will be new. When dealing with utilitarian arguments, essentially we deal with arithmetic. And when dealing with the maximization of goodness, which a utilitarian system suggests is the ultimate value, we are talking about creating the most or infinite pleasure and well-being in the world. Before we get into this, I first need to point out that arithmetic arguments in philosophy, especially when dealing with infinites, are so often vague and uncertain enough for me to avoid them entirely. They are often some of my least favourite arguments, even if they have some merit. However, these are the types of arguments a utilitarian must grapple with when discussing an omnibenevolent God. But luckily, I believe these arguments are straightforward enough to avoid this common problem. The first argument comes from a theory of multiple worlds. A common approach of a theodicy is to state that the world we are living in must be the best of all possible worlds for whatever reason, seeming that this must be the case if our all-loving, all-good creator exists. I'd like to flip this on its head, however, and state that not only may this not be the best of all possible worlds, but in fact it would be necessary that an imperfect world would exist to maximize well-being, if an all-good creator was a utilitarian. Let's imagine our idea of a utilitarian utopia, for an instance. An infinite set of worlds where everyone experienced infinite pleasure at all times. This would seemingly be the end goal of any utilitarian system, and this is clearly not the situation we find ourselves in now. But let's imagine if this world of infinite pleasure did actually exist, and a wholly good God had the option to create this world, but also the world that we currently live in too, with all its flaws. Would he not be obliged to do so to bring about the utility of this world into being? Our world, while flawed, still contains utility, so it only makes sense to create it alongside whatever else exists. One thought may be that the world should not be created, because instead of creating this world, just another more perfect world could be created instead, alongside what we already have in our utilitarian utopia. However, in mathematics, it is understood that some infinities are genuinely and truly larger than others. I'll leave a link in the description to a video explaining this in further detail, but I'll give a quick explanation of it now as well. If we take an infinite list of numbers with infinite digits, we have not used every single number that there is in existence. For example, let's create a new number by adding 1 to the first digit of the first number, the second digit of the second number, the third digit of the third number, and so on, and we will actually end up generating a new number. Why? Well, if you note, there is always a digit that is different from another digit in every single number in our infinite series. So we've created a new number that hasn't existed in our original set of infinite numbers. Not only this, there are an infinite number of ways to go around creating these new numbers. This has led mathematicians to conclude that there are genuinely larger infinities than others. But how is this relevant, bearing in mind how much I hate arguments of arithmetic that deal with infinities in philosophy? Well, since we can discover new parameters for infinity that contain more numbers than previous infinities, likewise with the utility or amount of pleasure in a number of different worlds in the multiverse, the set of an infinite number of worlds for every possible total amount of pleasure contained within them is a greater set than an infinite set of worlds with maximum pleasure. And since the first set contains this second set, this first set that includes imperfect worlds has a higher amount of utility. Let me go over that just quickly again. So if we could imagine a multiverse where infinite worlds exist, and in every single world, infinite pleasure exists in that multiverse. This may be the typical conception of a utilitarian utopia, the end goal of utilitarianism. However, using this accepted principle that some infinities can be larger sets of infinities than others, we could also imagine a multiverse where we have an infinite amount of this particular type of universe where maximum pleasure exists. But not only this, we also have an infinite amount of universes where 50% of the maximum pleasure exists, or 60%, etc, etc, etc. And this new set of universes in the multiverse that we've imagined here is a greater set containing more maximum utility than the first set. Not only this, but virtue ethics aside, every different possible way to come to this utility is of equal value. One could imagine a universe with 50% of the total maximum utility, but there may be endless ways where such a universe exists. When one thinks that the ways that suffering is distributed in the world is distasteful, they are falling out of utilitarian ethics into virtue ethics. To the utilitarian, the total amount of pleasure is all that is valuable. Furthermore, having many possible ways to create a world of X, say 50% value, allows our set of infinite worlds to be expanded further. Rather than having the false utilitarian dream of a universe with maximum pleasure, we have instead created a utilitarian dream which is a multiverse with infinite universes of maximum pleasure, in addition to infinite universes of varying pleasure, and the infinite number of ways in which they can be brought into existence. So if God has the option to add our world into being, why shouldn't he? So long as it is valuable, it contributes to the utility of being. From this utilitarian framework then, not only is our suffering defensible, but it is expected using utilitarian logic. The problem of evil does not work for utilitarians. Of course, for many this may seem unjust, that such horror is created just to marginally increase the well-being of the cosmos. It must be understood that these objections begin to resort back to virtue ethics. I believe in virtue ethics myself, but many atheists are utilitarians and use the problem of evil misguidedly. It could be the case, even from a virtue ethics lens, however, that this utilitarian argument has some merit, but that certain things are so horrific, God cannot leave them unpunished. But that's just one possibility. So, to summarize this argument. First, an all-powerful and all-good creator must maximize the amount of pleasure in existence, assuming utilitarianism. Second, an all-powerful creator has the ability to create multiple worlds. Third, the set of multiple worlds with infinite worlds with maximum utility contains less utility than the set of infinite worlds of infinitely variable positive utility. So any amount of pleasure, that's net pleasure that isn't negative in the universe. Which leads us to the conclusion, fourth, therefore it can be expected that suffering can exist if an all-loving, all-powerful God exists. The second argument I will just touch on very briefly. It's a similar concept. There is a unique utility to be found on a soul's journey from suffering to eternal bliss that should not be overlooked in the quest of maximizing utility. This argument is bolstered by a previous utilitarian theodicy I posted on my channel, where I stated that a past of suffering could lead to an increased state of maximal pleasure in the future. I'll leave a link to that in the description. So, that was the theodicy from utilitarianism. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. I'd be completely happy to discuss this further and in more detail with anyone down in the comments. Yes, I hope you enjoyed the video. I think that this, despite not being a utilitarian myself, I think that this is a great rebuttal for any utilitarian who tries to claim anything about God being unjust for creating the evil and suffering in the world, whether it be animal suffering, human suffering, any type of suffering. I think it falls short if they approach it from a utilitarian framework when they're considering all of this. But you may disagree, feel free to. I just hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought, as I said in the comments. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.